Israel is pressing ahead with its biggest assault in a month in southern Gaza.
And the light of hope for a 30-day ceasefire in Gaza, which were earlier being reported, is now diminishing. Now, this comes as Qatar said that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's reported criticism was obstructing mediation efforts in Gaza.
This conflict arose after a leaked recording allegedly captured him calling the Gulf state problematic. This is what Netanyahu said, and I'm quoting here, "You haven't seen me thank Qatar. Have you noticed? I haven't thanked Qatar. Why? Because Qatar to me is no different in essence from the United Nations, from the Red Cross, and in a way it's even more problematic. However, I'm willing to use any mediator now who can help me bring them home."
Qatar was quick to condemn. Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson Majid Al-Ansari said on social media platform X, and I'm quoting him here, "We are appalled by the alleged remarks attributed to the Israeli Prime Minister in various media reports about Qatar's mediation role." Now, Qatar, the US and Egypt have been mediating between the two sides for weeks over the release of Israeli captives and the release of Palestinian prisoners and more aid to the enclave. But the plan is being held up with Hamas and Israel at odds over how to permanently end the Gaza war.
In Gaza, 9 people were killed in a tank shelling on a UN shelter. Israel has, however, denied the allegations of the attack. The United States said that it deplored the incident.
Incredibly concerning, Leon. When we deplore today's attack on the UN's Khan Yunis Training Center, you've heard me say it before, you've heard the Secretary say it before, but civilians must be protected, and the protected nature of UN facilities must be respected. And humanitarian workers must be protected so that they can continue providing civilians with the life-saving humanitarian assistance that they need.
Intense fighting was also reported close to hospitals in Khan Yunis. The Hamas officials said that dozens of Israeli tanks are surrounding Nasser Hospital from all sides. The Israeli army earlier said that it had encircled Khan Yunis, which has become the epicenter of recent fighting.
Meanwhile, Italian Defense Ministry has announced that 100 Palestinian children wounded in the war-torn Gaza will be receiving medical treatment in Italian hospitals. The children will be hospitalized in several Italian cities, including Rome, Bologna, Florence. In France, 7 wounded Palestinian children from the war-torn Gaza Strip arrived for medical treatment. It is the second such evacuation to the European country after 2 other Palestinian children arrived on the 28th of December.
Now, in Washington, an overwhelming majority of US President Joe Biden's fellow Democrats in the Senate, they backed a statement reiterating US support of a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Netanyahu had earlier said that he objected to any Palestinian statehood that did not guarantee Israel's security. The statement then provoked international concern, including from Israel's biggest backer, the United States.
At the ICJ, UN's top court, it said that it would hand down its landmark ruling on Friday in the case against Israel over alleged genocide in Gaza. For more on this, we're now being joined by Mr. Edward P. Joseph from Washington, D.C. Mr. Joseph is a senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies and foreign policy analyst. Sir, thank you so much for joining us. Always a pleasure to have you.
Good to be with you.
Sir, now I want to begin by asking you, do you feel Israel can negotiate further given the mounting internal as well as international pressure on the Netanyahu government to bring back the hostages? That remains a point of contention, as you know.
Well, that's exactly the centerpiece of what we all hope for, which is a break from this terrible fighting, which, of course, is inflicting a terrible toll on Palestinian civilians. And we saw just on Monday that the risks to the Israeli army with some 24 Israeli soldiers who were killed in fighting in Gaza. And, of course, all of this stems from this terrible attack of October 7th and the revelation, of course, that Hamas, instead of spending the enormous sums of money that it was receiving on supporting the Palestinian people in Gaza, was building some, over estimates say now, over 300 miles of tunnels, longer even than the London metro in London. So the underground. So the question is now how to stop the suffering of the Palestinians and this continuous fighting in Gaza and, of course, the volatile situation in the region. And the answer to that remains the hostages. The seizure of the hostages on October 7th by Hamas, and this is at the centerpiece of negotiations, apparently led by Qatar along with Egypt, to determine this. And apparently there was an offer put forward by the Israeli side for a 2-month ceasefire, 2 months ceasefire for the release of the hostages. And there are, of course, reports of other terms for this, but that's the centerpiece here. That's the focus, is whether Hamas will, in fact, release the hostages that, of course, it depends upon for its own security, that is, of the leadership. Please.
Mr. Joseph, I just want to take that a little further from there regarding, Israel and Hamas have agreed in principle for the month-long ceasefire, but they are still at odds regarding the end of the war. Now, I wanted to understand, given the mounting internal pressure on the Netanyahu government from within Israel, of course, do you feel Israel can negotiate any further, or will they have to just give in to the final details that are being reeled out regarding this ceasefire? Or do you still feel the Netanyahu government can put its terms forward regarding how this ceasefire is to now lead into the end of the war?
Well, again, we should all hope that the mediation succeeds by whether by Egypt or Qatar. We should hope that mediation succeeds and that Hamas and Israel will rapidly come to terms. Can the Netanyahu government continue to maintain its position? I see no signs that there's some type of weakening in Israel. Yes, it's true. There's internal pressure, great internal pressure from the families of the hostages on the prime minister. But, it's very difficult if in a negotiation to signal that you're susceptible to weakness and you can't hold on to your position. That's not a good place to be in a negotiation. And I just don't see those indicators that Prime Minister Netanyahu is somehow ready to give in. He's made continuous statements, even, for example, after this recent meeting with the British Foreign Minister David Cameron, of intention to continue. And again, those are important signals for the negotiation. They go exactly to your very important question that you're asking. Please.
Sir, I also wanted to understand, one, of course, what do you think is the larger game plan here? What is Israel actually trying to achieve? Because we've seen the situation remains volatile. They've always maintained that this war is against Hamas, but we're seeing the death toll in Gaza mount. Also, what I want to understand is that we've seen the repercussions of this in the wider region as well. After the US carried out strikes on Iranian proxies in Iraq, now the Houthis have fired 3 ballistic missiles at a US ship in Gulf of Aden. So what's your take on the situation here?
I think those are actually 2 separate questions.
Right.
If we ask what are Israel's intentions and what about the ramifications in the region, which actually are less complicated. They're very serious in the region, but less complicated than it appears, because in all cases, they return back to Iran. So in the case of the Houthis, it goes back to Iran. In case of the more than 150 strikes on U.S. personnel deployed in Iraq by the invitation of the government of Iraq and in neighboring Syria, fighting and making sure ISIS doesn't reconstitute, it's again, these are Iran-backed militias. Hezbollah is the interesting question, because Hezbollah is the most heavily armed, and yet Iran does not release and give the green light to Hezbollah to attack Israel, because, of course, Iran needs Hezbollah to defend Iran, which is its primary concern. Iran's concern is not the Palestinians. Iran's concern is Iran. And we saw that, of course, with the exchange, as you all well know, in Pakistan, the strike in Pakistan on the 16th of January, in which Pakistan retaliated, as was expected, on the 18th of January. This followed the January 3rd terrorist attack in Kerman, in Iran, by the Islamic State. None of this had anything to do with Israel. or the Palestinians or Gaza. So we see Iran is embroiled in its own tensions. Iran is the source of this escalation and destabilization that we see in the Middle East. To answer your other question, which is also very important, about Israel's intentions, I think the bedrock aims are very clear. Israel was attacked on October 7th in a way that it cannot simply sustain. It's not about some type of revenge or retaliation for Israel, as I understand Israel's intentions and its core aims in Gaza. They are aimed not at the civilian population, but at Hamas. They are aimed at eliminating the strategic threat that Hamas has, which is very difficult to do, in part, as I mentioned, because of these tunnels. They give permanent sanctuary for Hamas to build rockets, to hold hostages, to protect its leadership while Hamas exposes the civilians to the risk of death by military strikes in Gaza. And of course, we see no effort whatsoever by Hamas to protect civilians or avoid embedding. To the contrary. So that's what, in my estimation, you ask a very important question, and that's what I believe Israel's core aims are. Please.
All right, that was Mr. Edward P. Joseph joining us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your time, sir.
You're welcome.